And I had this doctor raise his hand and he said, well, how would Medicare ever know? And the way they would know is some very well-meaning patient who's just thinking, you know what, I know my doctor doesn't take Medicare, but I'm going to try to turn this into Medicare myself. And that's exactly what happens.
Lisa, thank you for joining us today. I want to be frank with you. I've been looking forward to being able to chat with you a long time about Medicare, specifically for chiropractors. I represent quite a few chiropractors. I know you have a lot of chiropractors as clients, and I often get questions about Medicare compliance, and I feel like a lot of them are not doing it correctly. Or do you see a lot of misinformation or misunderstanding from chiropractors when it comes to even enrolling in Medicare and what they have to do to comply with Medicare?
Yeah, absolutely. And first of all, Wade, thank you for having me on your show today. I appreciate that. And I do have a bit of a passion about this because I've been working in the chiropractic field for 44 years, and I think Medicare is probably one of the most problematic areas that chiropractors have as far as compliance and just making sure they're coloring in the lines. You know what I mean? And so you mentioned provider enrollment, and I hear, unfortunately, more and more chiropractors will, when I'm talking to them, they'll say, well, I don't take Medicare. And I'm like, okay, well, tell me what you mean by that. What do you mean by I don't take Medicare? And they'll say things like, well, we just don't bill Medicare for any covered services. We just see maintenance patients, or we don't. We only bill physical therapy services. We don't bill spinal manipulation because Medicare only covers spinal manipulation. Or they'll say something like, we have our Medicare patients sign an ABN form, an advanced beneficiary notice, notifying them that Medicare, that they're just going to pay cash for their services. And then I'll ask them, well, are you enrolled in Medicare? And they'll say, well, no. And unfortunately, and it is the law that chiropractors cannot opt out of Medicare. And and I've got the policy. So if there's any chiropractors listening to this saying, "Prove it," I can prove it. I promise you. I don't just say it. It's not just me, and my opinion. But chiropractors cannot opt out of Medicare.
I think that
And
probably starts some of the confusion because some providers physicians can opt out. There's a process, but then there's a
yes.
group of providers who can't opt out, and chiropractors fall squarely within that group that can't opt out. So they can't run away from Medicare.
No, they can't. Their choices are very clear. They can become a participating provider with Medicare. They can be a non-participating provider with Medicare, and both of those are fine. And there's some differences, but both of those keep them within that coloring book, right? Of the coloring lines. Or if they simply do not want to enroll in Medicare, they don't have to, but they can't see Medicare patients.
So
And what that means,
how do they know if they're seeing a Medicare patient? I mean, is it something they ask on patient intake? Is it something they can check? Is there a place to check? How would they know?
well, I mean, the vast majority of them you'll know by their age. So if they're over 65, you see their date of birth and they're over 65. Chances are pretty good they have either Medicare or Medicare Advantage. And either way, they can't see them. All right. So if their date of birth puts them over 65, that would be a clear sign that the chiropractor would have to say, I'm sorry, I can't see you. I don't have a Medicare number. I can't take Medicare patients.
So ignorance of the law is really no excuse. They have to either if the patient is a certain age, they just have to have a policy that we're just not going to take patients over 65, or we're going to double check. But if a patient maybe is not honest with them, says, okay, well then I don't take Medicare, or I'm not on Medicare. What the patient tells them is really irrelevant. It's whether or not the patient actually is that triggers their obligation.
Correct. And to me, the saddest thing about it is that if the chiropractor has a patient that they've been seeing for years and years and they age in to Medicare, what are they going to do? Now they have to refer that patient out of the practice. And this may have been a good long time patient of theirs, that they'll have to refer out. So, yeah.
So you used terminology a while ago, participating and non-participating providers, or par and non-par providers. Explain what those distinctions are.
Yeah. So a participating provider basically agrees to file claims for covered services on behalf of the patient and then wait for Medicare to pay them. So they accept assignment, is what they do. A non participating provider also is required to file for covered services for that Medicare patient, but they do not have to accept assignment. And if they don't accept assignment, the patient basically pays them up front, and there is um, a fee called the limiting charge that is on the Medicare physician fee schedule that's about 15% higher than the Medicare allowable for a par provider. They would collect that fee up front. They would bill Medicare as a non-assigned claim, meaning they do not want Medicare to pay them. And then Medicare reimburses the patient 80% of the par rate. Okay.
Okay.
So there's a little bit of a differential. Like, for example, I'm going to use whole numbers. Let's say the par rate for spinal manipulation is $40 and the limiting charge is $45. Okay. And it's usually about a $4 or $5 differential. Okay. Medicare, if the provider is non-par and they don't accept assignment, they can collect $45 from the patient. They bill it to Medicare. Medicare will reimburse the patient 80% of $40 of the $40 rate. So that $5 differential is just an extra cost that the patient has to incur for seeing a non-par provider.
I see. So when
Yeah,
a chiropractor chooses par or non-par, is it on a per patient basis or for all patients, for all Medicare patients? And how long does that designation last? How long does that category last for the chiropractor?
so the chiropractor will remain whatever they want to indefinitely as long as they do their revalidations every 5 years. Um, if they wish to change their election, they can do so at the end of the year. The window is usually between November 15th and December 31st. So let's say a provider is a par provider and they want to go non-par. They can write a letter to their Medicare administrative contractor. Here in Texas, it's Novitas Solutions is the contractor that processes the Medicare claims. They send a letter to Novitas on their letterhead saying, I wish to become a non-par provider effective January 1st of next year.
I see.
Once
So
that
they can
effective,
change that election maybe once a year, or in whenever that
yeah,
window is. But
right,
once they've said it, once they've made that election, then until it's changed, they have to treat all Medicare beneficiaries the same.
correct. Whereas in an opt-out provisions are a 2-year provision, but chiropractors don't qualify for opt-out at
They
this
don't get
point.
that opt out.
Yeah,
Okay, so let's go down the participating provider path a little bit.
okay.
So if they're a participating provider, that means they agree to accept the physician fee schedule amount for all reimbursements for covered services.
For
Is that
covered
right?
services.
So
Yes.
that being the case, if they're providing a covered service to a Medicare beneficiary, explain the process. Do they accept the copay up front and then bill Medicare? How and when do they get paid?
Um, Medicare is actually one of the better payers, honestly. I mean, we bill for a lot of different payers. If a provider files what we call a clean claim to Medicare, meaning there's no errors, it gets filed electronically. Medicare is mandated to pay in 14 business days, and they do like clockwork. So if I bill today as a Tuesday, and Medicare accepts that claim today, I'll get a payment in my bank account direct deposited in 2 Tuesdays from now. Again, it's just like clockwork. Now, if there's a problem with the claim or Medicare requests records, that could delay the process, or if there's an error on the claim, that could delay the process. But if everything looks good, it's going to be 2 weeks without, fail.
Is there a copay associated with the patient? I mean, does the patient pay a portion of the fee for the covered service?
For Medicare Part B, Medicare Part B covers all medical services this way, not just chiropractic. There is I think it's either $283 or $285 deductible at the beginning of the year, which most Medicare patients meet in the first month because they go to their doctor or whatever. So they meet their deductible fairly quickly.
So did I understand you correctly that Medicare will pay 80% of the fee and the patient's responsible for the 20%, which sometimes that may be covered by a gap policy?
Correct.
Those are for covered services. Under Part B, I know chiropractor services are very narrowly covered. What about services that are not covered? If you're a participating provider, a chiropractor, can you bill the patient cash for those uncovered services?
Well, you actually need to. You have to.
Okay.
Because if you don't, you're actually, and Wade, you're probably familiar with this, in violation of the Anti-Kickback statute, which would indicate that you are inducing the patient to come to you by offering these reduced services or free services. So the same thing goes, I just had a question about this today from a help desk inquiry, and they said, well, do I have to charge the patient for the exam? Because the exam is required. So do I have to charge the patient for it? And the answer is absolutely, you have to, because if you don't, then you are creating an inducement for that patient to come and see you over somebody else. And that's against the law. You can't do that. So they have to charge for those non-covered services.
Okay, so for those non-covered services, yes, we have to charge for those. Do we have to? Where does the ABN, the advanced beneficiary notice, come in? Do we need to give the patient the ABN prior to charging them for these uncovered services?
No, not under the Medicare program. There is a law called the No Surprises Act. I'm sure you're familiar with the No Surprise Billing Act, but that is not applicable to Medicare or federally funded programs. So there are actually two ABN forms. You have the mandatory ABN, which addresses covered services. So for chiropractic, that's 3 codes. The 3 spinal manipulation codes: 98940, 41, and 42. So there's an ABN for that. And that ABN is used when the patient is moving from active treatment to correct the subluxation, which is the coverage requirement or the coverage criteria, to maintenance care. So once the patient is moving into supportive care or maintenance care, it's no longer covered by Medicare. At that time, the provider issues an ABN to the patient in advance. It's called an advanced beneficiary notice. And they let the patient know, now that you're in maintenance, you need to make an election as to what you want to do. Do you want us to continue to bill Medicare? Would you like to pay cash for these services? Or do you just not want the services at all? And those are the 3 choices. Then you have what's called a voluntary ABN, which is for everything else, all your non-covered services. And you don't have to issue a voluntary ABN. What I see most chiropractors do is they will issue something like a notice of exclusion of Medicare benefits, and they'll list the different services that they have with the associated costs, just saying these are the services that are not covered by Medicare that most likely will not be covered by your supplemental plan. If Medicare doesn't cover it, the supplemental plans usually don't cover it. And here are your associated costs. And then they
Okay.
just notify the patient that way.
And so maybe that's where some of the confusion comes from chiropractors. They think, oh, I'm only doing maintenance, which is not covered, so I don't have to submit anything to Medicare, and therefore I don't have to be enrolled in Medicare. The requirement for submission of the claims is a separate requirement from the requirement to be enrolled. You still have to
Correct.
be enrolled. And as you were talking, it strikes me that one way that chiropractors can get in trouble is the patient goes ahead and submits the claim to Medicare, and the provider is not is not enrolled, and Medicare realizes. Yeah.
It's exactly what happens, Wade. So I was just in Colorado this past weekend teaching a cast practice seminar, 6 hours, and we talked about Medicare because obviously we have a lot of doctors who are converting to cash practices,
Mm-hmm.
and they think that they don't have to take Medicare. And I had this doctor raise his hand and he said, "Well, how would Medicare ever know? How would they
Right.
know?" And the way they would know is some very well-meaning patient who's just thinking, you know what, I know my doctor doesn't take Medicare, but I'm going to try to turn this into Medicare myself. And that's exactly what happens 95% of the time when the chiropractors get in trouble for not being enrolled in Medicare. It's because of some well-meaning patient of theirs that decides they want to bill their own claims.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
you mentioned the trend to move toward cash pay practices. I see that as well. So let's kind of follow the same reasoning for cash pay chiropractors who enroll as non-par or non-participating providers.
Mhm.
Uh, they still have to enroll. We've established that, but they can elect, or they should elect, to be non-participating providers. So instead of billing the physician fee schedule amount, they can bill a higher amount, what you've called a limiting charge. Is that right?
Correct.
How
Yes.
do they know what the limiting charge is? That a cap on how much they can charge the patient?
Yes, for covered services. Yeah.
Okay. And
Um,
so
and you,
they know it's a covered service because it's in the physician fee schedule then.
correct. Well, there's only 3 codes that are covered. Yeah.
And so for those instances with covered services, the walk us through the process. The chiropractor bills the patient, and then the chiropractor is obligated to submit the claim to Medicare.
For covered services, which are the 3 spinal manipulation codes if the patient is under corrective care to correct a subluxation. And so that would be the only time the provider would be required to bill Medicare. And the other instances again would be few and far between. Like if the patient, say the patient goes on maintenance care, and they elect option 1 on the ABN form. There's 3 options, as I mentioned. If they choose option 1, then they're required to bill still, but they change the modifier from the active treatment modifier, which is AT, and they change it to a what's called a GA modifier. GA just is a modifier that tells Medicare that an advanced beneficiary notice is on file, and Medicare will deny it, but they'll deny it to the patient's responsibility. So, it's business as usual. It's just that the provider would still have to bill. Yeah.
And so the requirement to get an ABN, that advanced beneficiary notice, again, that's only for covered services.
Correct.
So I represent, a lot of chiropractors perform spinal decompression.
Mhm.
Is that a covered service under Part B?
No.
Okay, so if their entire practice is spinal decompression, they still have to be enrolled if they're going to see Medicare beneficiaries as patients.
Correct.
They
Mhm.
enroll as non-participating providers, and then they can provide that service, which is a
Yeah.
non-covered service, at essentially
Mhm.
whatever rate the patient is willing to pay.
Well, I mean, it's based on the provider's fee schedule at that point. So So, the provider needs to have a consistent fee schedule across the board, whether, they
Certainly.
can't have dual schedules or anything like that.
And so for again, as with participating chiropractors, participating providers, it makes no difference. The obligation to enroll is triggered by seeing patients who are Medicare beneficiaries, even if you never provide any covered service to that patient.
Correct. That is correct.
And
Yes.
so in those cases, an ABN, advanced beneficiary notice, would not be required because the service was never expected to be a covered service at all.
That's correct.
I hear from some chiropractors at times they think that the ABN somehow insulates them from any obligation to comply with Medicare. They treat it almost as if it's an opt-out kind of provision. Like, as long as I get a patient to sign an ABN, then I'm covered. But that's not the case.
No, that's not the case. First of all, if they don't have a Medicare number, they can't use a Medicare form, and that's a Medicare form. So, the ABN is, it's like I tell most providers, it's kind of like a piece of toilet paper. It's not going to do you any good, right? The other thing is that there are 3 elections on the ABN that the patient can make, and you can't ask them to just choose the cash option. You can't tell them, you can't say, all right, here, sign this form, just choose option 2 and we're good. You'll just pay cash, right? In essence, what you're doing is you're trying to create a private contract with a Medicare patient, which is prohibited under the Medicare rules and laws.
Well,
Yeah.
you touched on earlier the there were some differences between Medicare Part B or original Medicare and Medicare Advantage plans. How does what we've talked about change, if at all, if the patient is an MA patient?
Well, Medicare Advantage behaves like commercial insurance. Okay, so there are the rules. If you read the Medicare Managed Care Manual from CMS, it's very clear that the Medicare Advantage plans must provide the same coverage as Medicare Part B. So Medicare Advantage plans have to cover those 3 spinal manipulation codes. The difference is they can restrict the providers who give that coverage.
Mm.
So the provider has to enroll separately as a provider in that network. It's just like being in a commercial plan network. They can be participating or non-participating in that network. And then there are rules for whether, so for example, let's say under the Medicare Advantage plan rules, if it's an HMO plan, the Medicare Advantage policy manual states that the patient must see a provider in their network or there are no benefits. So if they go to, let's say you are a non-par provider in that patient's HMO network, and as long as you're enrolled in Medicare, okay, you can tell that patient, you know what, there are no out of network benefits. We are out of network with your plan, and there are no benefits. So we're just going to treat you as a cash patient, and they give the patient an estimate of care, and they're good to go. But let's say they are a Medicare provider and the patient has a PPO plan that has covered services, even out of network.
Mhm.
That provider who is in Medicare is required to bill for that PPO plan and take the out of network benefits. Okay. Now they can decide to not accept assignment and have the patient paid directly. Some payers do it, some payers don't. It's a little bit more convoluted and a little bit more complicated under the Advantage plans. But the bottom line is that the Advantage plans have to cover the same uh, services, but they also, as a way to compete, will often have extended benefits or expanded benefits. And those benefits could include exams and x-rays and therapy codes. And So providers could actually get paid more under some of the Advantage plans than they might get paid under regular Medicare,
Mm-hmm.
at least from the payers.
Sure. Does the obligation to file, does the chiropractor have an obligation to file anything additional for Medicare Advantage beneficiaries for non-covered services, or is it
No,
the same?
the same. Yeah. Yeah.
How would a
If it's
chiropractor know if the patient is an MA patient? I guess other than asking them or having their card, is there a way to verify whether they're under Part B or Medicare Advantage?
Yeah, so once they get a Medicare number, they need to enroll with their Medicare administrative contractor. In the case of Texas, it's Novitas. There's an enrollment portal. There's a portal called Novitas Sphere, and once they have access to Novitas Sphere, they can go into the eligibility portion of the portal and put in the patient's Medicare beneficiary number from their red, white, and blue card, and it will tell them if they have B or an Advantage plan.
I see. So I want to kind of close our discussion about Medicare for chiropractors by trying to convey kind of what the penalties are if they're not complying with Medicare. I can hear some of my clients ask the same questions that the gentleman asked of you at your conference. How are they going to find out? And, what are they going to do to me? What are the consequences if they do find out? What are
Mhm.
some of those consequences?
Well, I'm not a lawyer. You are. so, so I do know that the anti-kickback statute is a criminal statute. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
it is.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's a criminal statute, so there could be criminal penalties for inducing a Medicare patient to come and see you when you don't have a Medicare number. Um, there could be grounds for false claims being filed. The False Claim Act is civil. The penalties for those it could be up to treble, three
Right.
times the amount of what those claims should have been, plus $11,000 per claim line.
Yeah,
Okay, so
there can be
there's
extremely consequential penalties under the False Claims Act, all of which require some filing of a claim. I guess I'm asking if does the Medicare billing guidelines have establish any consequences if you're treating Medicare patients, even if you're not submitting claims to Medicare? What's the consequence if you know what if chiropractors choose not to enroll and yet still continue to see Medicare patients?
Yeah, I mean, I would think that, and again, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't really speak to this with a lot of authority, but I would imagine that it would be under the anti-kickback statute laws that they would get nailed on that, and it is criminal.
I again represent a lot of chiropractors, and there may be, I suspect that sometimes chiropractors will work in multiple offices. Well, here, this is a question: does the participating election or non-participating election follow the chiropractor, or is it relative to the clinic? In other words, could a chiropractor work at one location and be participating because that's the owner wants them to bill Medicare, while at another location they're moonlighting at be non-participating?
Yes, the whether the claim is paid as a par or non-par is based on the group, not the
Okay.
individual. Yeah.
So they could have separate designations depending on if they, which entity they're working for.
Yes, and of course, the group itself has to attach that provider to their group through something called a reassignment. So, once that provider is reassigned to that group for that billing, that provider, if that group is par, that he or she would be par with that group. But if they bill on their own, or if they bill with another group that's non-par, then that provider would be non-par with that group. Yes.
I can just hear some of my clients calling me after they watch this video and say, well, this is what I've been doing. Is that okay? Um, how can I send my clients to you to answer those questions? How do people get in touch with you if they have additional questions?
Well, they can email me, info@goldstarmedical.net.
Okay.
It's probably the easiest way. They can call our corporate number. It's 866-942-5655. Once they get in touch with us, then typically what I'll do is I'll send them a link to schedule a consult with me. I do free consults a lot, and I'm happy to talk to them. Also, through the Texas Chiropractic Association's website, I am the facilitator of a national help desk that we have about 21 state associations participating with. So they can type their question into the help desk, and it comes directly to me. And then I can answer that question through email or give them a link to talk to them, in more detail about that. So they could go to the Texas Chiropractic Association website and go to the insurance help desk and submit their questions there.
Outstanding. Well, Lisa, I can't thank you enough. You brought some clarity to me and on this somewhat complicated issue. And
Yeah.
so I appreciate that. And I know you brought some clarity to a lot of the listeners. Thank you so much for your willingness to help out. Much appreciated. And thank you for all that you do to kind of keep us all on the right track.
I appreciate that. Just one other thing, real quick. Under the TCA, the Board of Examiners for Texas, licensed chiropractors have to take at least 8 hours of Medicare training.
Hmm.
I think within their first 2 years of licensure. So we just recorded the 8 hours, and it is available on the TCA website. So they can go to the TCA website and access that. Now, I don't know what the rules are for, they may have to pay something if they're not members. I don't know what that is, but there's 8 hours of Medicare training on there that they can access for a lot more information as well.
Great. Well, thank you again for all that you do. And I appreciate your time today and bringing a little bit of clarity to a complex issue. Thank you.